The flow of costs are very similar for a job order and process cost system. Both costing systems accumulate manufacturing cost by debiting raw materials inventory, factory labor, and manufacturing overhead. Both systems assign these costs to the same accounts: work in process inventory, finished goods inventory, and the cost of goods sold. The method of assigning cost will differ significantly. Tyler Company manufactures rollerblades and skateboard wheels. Manufacturing consists of two processes, machining and assembling. So there will be two work-in-process inventory accounts. The machining department shapes, hones, and drills the raw materials, whereas the assembly department assembles and packages the parts. Tyler will track materials, labor, and manufacturing overhead as they are added or incurred in each department. When it finishes its work, the machining department transfers the partially completed units to the assembly department. The assembly department finishes the goods by adding more materials and incurring labor and overhead, and then transfers the finished goods to the finished goods inventory. Upon sale, Tyler removes the goods from the finished goods inventory and increases or debits cost of goods sold. As indicated earlier, the accumulation of the cost of materials, labor, and manufacturing overhead is the same in a process cost system as in a job order cost system. Both systems debit raw materials inventory at the time of purchase. They also debit factory labor for all labor costs incurred and debit actual overhead cost to manufacturing overhead. The assignment of the three manufacturing cost elements to work in process in a process cost system is different from a job order cost system. You will have more than one work in process inventory account. Let's look at how companies assign the manufacturing cost elements in a process cost system. All raw materials issued for production are a materials cost to the producing department. A process cost system may also use material requisition slips, but it generally requires fewer requisitions than in a job order cost system. The materials are used for processes rather than for specific jobs. At the beginning of the process, a company usually adds most of the materials needed for production. However, other materials may be added at various points. For example, in the manufacture of a Hershey candy bar, the chocolate and other ingredients are added at the beginning of the first process, and the wrappers and cartons are added at the end of the packaging process. Tyler adds materials at the beginning of each process. Tyler makes the following entry to record the materials used: debit work in process machining and debit work in process assembling, and it will credit raw materials inventory. In a process cost system, companies may use time tickets to determine the cost of labor for each production department. Since they assign labor costs to departments or processes rather than a job, they can obtain departmental payroll summaries. The entry to assign labor cost to machining and assembling for Tyler Company is debit work in process machining and debit work in process assembling and credit factory labor. The objective in assigning overhead is to allocate the overhead cost to production departments on an objective and equitable basis. A primary driver of overhead cost in a continuous manufacturing operation is machine time used, not direct labor. I'm not all about chocolate, but in this production environment, I think of M&Ms, machines, and materials. Many companies will use machine hours to allocate manufacturing overhead cost using a predetermined overhead rate. Tyler's entry to allocate overhead to the two processes is to debit work in process machining and work in process assembling and credit manufacturing overhead. At the end of the month, Tyler needs an entry to record the cost of goods transferred out of the machining department into the assembly department. Tyler will debit work in process assembling and credit work in process machinery. When the assembling department completes the units, it transfers them to the finished goods warehouse. The entry to transfer is debit finished goods inventory and credit work in process assembling. When Tyler Company sells the finished goods, it records the cost of goods sold by debiting cost of goods sold and crediting finished goods inventory. Right, in this exercise, you're going to record the April transactions. So I want you to focus on recording the materials, the labor, the overhead, but also the costs that were transferred into the canning department, which means they were transferred out of the cooking department.